So what is going on, everyone? This is Keith once again, and welcome back to WCCF Tech TV. And what we're seeing today is Metro Exodus. And no, it did not just come out today. I am a few days late on this one, and we can thank the game for locking me out several times through configuration changes. Yay, that is one form of DRM I would like to see go die in a fire. So with that out of the way, let's get to the point of this video. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but we are going to go ahead and go through and discuss what's going on. So the idea here is that we're doing a performance analysis, and the video is not nearly as in-depth as the article. So if you want to get a little deeper and see a lot of those 1% and 0.1% lows in a chart that's much easier to read, go down to the link in the description below and hit that up. So without further ado, let's discuss the test bench right quick. So what we've got is an EVGA Z370 classified motherboard with a Core i9-9900K at 5 GHz with 16 gigs of DDR4 3200 RAM. And of course the variety of graphics cards that will be listed as we move forwards. Now the game is being loaded off of a Crucial P1 NVMe drive, and we're using the latest drivers that were they're launch drivers. So these are the drivers that have come out since launch. And the big key here is, before we get into it, is something to keep in mind with this game is that performance varies drastically. So using the built-in benchmark is a pretty wild identifier of in-game performance, and I really wasn't comfortable with using it, so I scrapped it and did all of the testing in-game right after the point where you've taken control of the Aurora and you've come across the church. It's past the church scene. So the idea is I start off on one side of an embankment and come up around and go through the little camp that's set up and down the other side. Now, something important to note about that is when you're in the more open areas, the frame rate is really high. But when you're going through the area like where the train is, there's the particle effects and the effects from the fire in the trash cans. I mean, it's bum fires, and those effects greatly impact performance, like drastically. So if you go over to the site and you see the 1% and the 0.1% lows even later in this video, you'll understand that a lot of those lows are more indicative of through that portion of the benchmark. The game really never stuttered on any card except for the 1063 gig, and we'll get to that in a minute and you'll see why. But that's kind of the benchmark course that we ran and the notes on the thing about the frame rate. So the idea here is you're really seeing more of a scaling performance, like how each card scales in performance, more so than a general. It's hard to get an overall idea of how this game runs. So basically just take it as this card performs at this level, this one is above it, this one's above it, that kind of thing. So let's start things off actually with what I like to do is called preset scaling. So we take the game to 4K and we've got the 2080 Ti in there, and we go through each of the game's presets to see how it performs with each one. And you can see here clearly which one. I mean, we tested at Ultra. All of the tests going forward will be at Ultra, but you can see Extreme kind of took a hit under that. High, you get a little bit of performance back on it. Medium, quite a bit, and low, substantially more. But who wants to play at 4K low? But the idea here is to see how the game will scale from each preset. So you can take these numbers and kind of give you an idea on the other ones. So let's move into the actual game here. So 1080p, there are the results, and of course for you guys, I did identify all the Radeon cards as red and the GeForce cards as green. And you can see here that testing the game at Ultra settings with no DXR and no GameWorks features, so Hairworks and PhysX are disabled. Tessellation is on, however, something to keep note there. But it actually performs fairly well once you get, I mean, granted the 580 and the 1060 are struggling there. They're not quite hitting that 1080p 60 FPS point, but if you were to drop it down to high or medium, you'd be able to get that with no problem. The biggest struggler here is the 1063 gig, which is it's hamstrung pretty hard on this at this point. But you can see here the scaling clearly goes up and out as you would expect. And what's real interesting there is seeing the 2060 and the 1080 so close together. So moving up to 1440p, we see a lot of the same story here. So not a whole lot's changed. if you go over to the site, you'll see that a lot of things start to smooth out at 1440p as far as the minimums and the highs. So, or the minimums and the average. So things get a lot smoother at 1440p, and you start to see cards like you're going to have to go to Vega 56 level to really get right there at that 60 FPS or higher mark at 1440p consistently. And then when you move things up to UHD 4K 2160p, you're not really going to want to run this game at that resolution, because I mean, I guess you could argue that 30 with a controller and VSync locked, but I'm not sold on it at this. It's a pretty tough game to run at this resolution. So 4K is really going to be a pass on anything really under the 2080 Ti, and that's a lot of card to run that game. But let's move on to another thing that I like to do that's fairly interesting, and that's core scaling. But of course, right now we're just looking at the Intel core scaling until I can get my hands on a 2700X, so we can start looking at Ryzen core scaling again, since everybody seems to have a problem with the 1700. So we'll just leave it out for now. But we can see here 2 cores, 2 threads. The game will run, but very terribly. Moving up to 2 cores and 4 threads, we see a good gain there. And things are about to get real interesting when we go to 4 cores and up when hyperthreading is enabled. You start to take a hit with hyperthreading. So the game actually performs 6 core, 6 thread, 8 core, 8 thread are performing better than the 6 core 12 thread and the 8 core 16 thread. Now, unfortunately, we did do all of our testing with the 8 core 16 thread, but if you're somebody on a 9700K, you're probably going to be better off than the guy with the 900K in this game. Is it worth disabling hyperthreading? I would have a hard time saying yes, but all of these tests are at 1080p. So, I mean, if you're playing this game at 1080p with the 2080 Ti that we used to do this core scaling test, well, maybe, but I don't know. It's interesting to see. It's good to see that that games are getting a better job of utilizing more cores. However, this one's a bit odd in the sense that there's an impact, a negative impact rather, with the hyperthreading enabled. So that's just very interesting stuff to see. And at this point, if you're looking for RTX on features, you're really going to go over to the site and take a look at that, because it's a bit more in depth than what we're going to be able to do here without this video being entirely too long. So at this point, love to hear your comments on what you think about Metro Exodus, how it's performing, and are you playing it and are you enjoying it? I'd love to hear your thoughts down there in the comment section below. This has been Keith with WCCF Tech TV. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we hope to catch you in the next one.